All right, let's dive in. We're talking aircraft systems today.
Really fascinating stuff.
You've given me aviation textbook excerpts, engine diagrams.
Yeah.
It's a lot, but we're here to figure out how these huge machines,
Huge hunks of metal.
yeah, how do they actually stay in the air?
It's amazing, right? And it's not just about raw power.
Right.
It's like this perfectly engineered dance, you
Yeah.
know? Everything's connected.
Okay.
From generating thrust to managing fuel, cooling, even dealing with things like ice.
Wow.
It all works together.
So the engine, that's the muscle, right?
Yeah.
The textbook mentioned this thing called thrust,
Right.
basically the force that pushes the plane forward.
Exactly.
And there are two main ways to create it: reciprocating engines and turbine engines.
You got it. And those reciprocating engines,
Right.
they're like those old reliable workhorses, you know?
Yeah, okay.
You find them in a lot of smaller aircraft.
Yeah.
They take the chemical energy in fuel and turn it into mechanical energy to spin a propeller.
So kind of like how a bicycle pump, when you push it up and down,
Exactly.
it creates air pressure.
That's a great way to think about it.
Okay, cool.
And even within reciprocating engines, you've got different types, like radial engines.
Right.
These were really big in like the golden age of aviation.
Yeah.
Cylinders arranged in a circle, like a big, powerful cake almost.
They look so cool, but I guess there's a reason we don't see them as much anymore.
Well, they were great for their size, really powerful.
Right?
That was important back then.
Yeah.
And that round design actually helped keep them cool.
Okay.
But that same design created a lot of drag,
Oh, I see.
which is basically like trying to fly a brick through the air. Not very efficient.
Not good.
Yeah.
So that's where the horizontally opposed engines come in.
Exactly.
Those are the ones you usually see on smaller planes today, right?
Yeah, you see those a lot these days. Picture the cylinders all lined up on opposite sides
Well,
of the crankshaft, almost like boxers facing off, makes them
Uh-huh.
super compact, streamlined.
Makes sense.
Perfect for smaller, more fuel-efficient planes.
Okay, so those are the smaller guys.
Yeah,
Now let's talk about the big leagues turbine engines.
the heavy lifters.
Yeah. The textbook mentions turbojet, turboprop, turbofan, and turboshaft.
It's a mouthful, I know.
It's a lot of turbos. Are they
Yeah.
really that different?
They are different, but they all share that same basic principle.
Okay.
Using a continuous airflow to make that thrust.
Right.
Imagine a river pushing a mill wheel,
Okay.
but instead of water, it's air.
Right.
And instead of a mill, it's a plane.
Okay, so how do all those different turbos actually work?
All right, well, let's start with the turbojet, kind of the OG jet engine, you know?
Okay.
It's all about sucking in air, compressing it,
Right.
mixing it with fuel, boom, combustion,
Yeah.
and then blasting that high energy mix out the back for thrust.
Okay.
Then you've got turboprops.
Okay.
They use the turbine's power to spin a propeller
Okay.
like a giant fan pushing the plane forward.
So that's what you see on like those regional jets, those smaller airliners.
Exactly, you'll see them there.
Oh, okay.
Now, those massive engines you see on the big commercial jets,
Right.
those are the turbofans.
Yeah, they always look so powerful
They are powerful and efficient.
with that giant fan.
That fan is key.
Yeah.
It's like a double whammy. It pulls in tons of air,
Right.
but only some of it actually goes through the combustion part.
Oh, interesting.
The rest bypasses the core, gets blasted out the back.
So it's still providing thrust.
Exactly. Extra thrust without burning extra fuel.
Wow, that's pretty clever.
It's a clever design.
Yeah.
It's like a slipstream boosting the engine's power.
Very cool. Very cool.
And then there's the turbo shaft.
Now that one almost sounds like it's not even for airplanes.
You're right. It's not always about propellers.
Okay.
Turbo shafts are all about spinning other things.
Like what?
Think helicopters.
Oh, okay.
Instead of directly generating thrust, they power a shaft, which can then spin those helicopter rotors,
Oh, that's cool.
or even things like generators.
Okay, so we've got these engines creating all this thrust,
Yeah,
but the air, it gets pretty thin the higher you go.
that's a problem.
How do planes keep going when there's basically no air?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's where superchargers and turbochargers come in.
Okay.
They give those engines an extra boost when they need it most.
Okay, how?
Basically, they compensate for the thinner air at high altitudes by increasing air density, cramming more air into the engine.
So it's like giving the engine a little extra oxygen at altitude
Exactly. You got
to
it.
help it breathe.
Exactly.
But there's a difference between a supercharger and a turbocharger, right?
There is, you're right.
The textbook mentioned both.
Yeah, a supercharger is directly connected to the engine.
Okay.
So it's like instant boost, like a shot of espresso.
Gotcha.
Turbocharger is driven by the engine's exhaust gases.
What?
More efficient overall, but there's a little lag before you feel the boost.
So like waiting for that second cup of coffee to brew.
Exactly.
Wow, it's amazing.
Complicated.
How many little things there are just to get an engine to work at different altitudes?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
It's a lot of engineering.
It's really a testament to those engineers figuring all this out.
Right.
But none of it matters if you don't have a way to feed those engines.
It's true.
Let's talk about fuel.
Yes, let's. How do they get all that fuel to those thirsty engines?
All right, so there are two main ways. Gravity feed and fuel pump systems.
Okay.
Gravity feed, pretty simple, relies on gravity.
As the name suggests.
Exactly. Often see this in smaller aircraft,
Okay.
where the fuel tanks are above the engine. Gravity does the work.
Pretty straightforward.
Simple, effective.
But I'm guessing for larger aircraft,
Yeah.
you need something a bit more heavy duty.
Yeah, you need something a bit more powerful.
Okay.
Larger aircraft, they use fuel pump systems. Pumps draw fuel from the tanks, deliver it under pressure.
Okay, so it's a bit more controlled.
Much more controlled, yeah. More flexibility in placing those fuel tanks, too.
Oh, that's a good point.
And it makes sure there's always a good flow of fuel, even when the plane's maneuvering.
Right, because you're pulling G's, you don't want the fuel to get disrupted.
Exactly. You need that fuel flowing.
And what about the fuel primer? The
Yeah.
textbook mentioned that.
Oh, yeah, the fuel primer.
Is it too?
It's like a little hand pump, gives a little kickstart.
Okay.
Injects fuel right into the cylinders.
Okay.
Especially helpful in cold weather.
Like giving your car a jump start in the winter
Exactly.
when it's cold.
You got it.
Everything's a little sluggish.
Exactly. Needs a little encouragement.
And speaking of keeping things running smoothly,
Yeah.
fuel cleanliness, that's got to be important, right?
Hugely important.
Yeah.
You got to keep that fuel clean.
So how do they do that?
Aircraft have this whole system. Filters, strainers, sumps, drains. Think of it like your engine's own personal water purification system.
Okay, so walk me through it. What are all those parts doing?
All right, so you've got fuel strainers.
Okay.
They're like fine mesh screens, catch any tiny particles, like
Ah.
a coffee filter, but for airplane fuel.
Got it.
Then there are the sumps.
Okay.
These are like low points in the system where any water or gunk can settle and be drained out.
So it's a constant battle against contamination.
Pretty much.
And the textbook mentioned water in the fuel system is a big no-no,
Oh, yeah. Water in the fuel is bad news.
especially in cold weather, right?
Especially in the cold, just like it freezes in your pipes.
Right.
It can freeze in the fuel lines, and then no fuel to the engine.
And that's not good.
Not good at all. Plus, it can cause corrosion, and you don't want that inside your engine.
Definitely not.
So yeah, draining that fuel system is super important.
Regular maintenance. Got it. Now, what about the color coding I read about for different fuel grades?
Oh, yeah. That's to avoid any mix-ups, which could be really bad. Each grade has its own color, so you know what you're putting in.
So it's like a visual check to make sure you're putting the right fuel in.
Exactly. Safety first.
That makes sense.
Like the most common grade for those piston engines, it's blue.
Okay.
Jet fuel, usually pale yellow, kind of straw colored.
Interesting. So we've got the fuel in the engine,
Yeah.
but how does it mix with the air to actually burn?
All right, so that's where the induction system steps in.
Okay.
Two main types, carburetors and fuel injection systems.
Okay.
Carburetors, that's old school. You'll see them in vintage aircraft mostly.
Carburetors always seem so mysterious. How do they actually work?
They work on this cool principle. It's called the Venturi effect. Imagine holding a piece of paper in front of your mouth
Okay.
and you blow across the top of it.
Okay. Yeah.
The paper lifts, right?
Yeah.
That's because the fast-moving air creates low pressure.
Right.
A carburetor, kind of similar.
So the carburetor uses airflow to pull in the fuel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And mix it with the air for that perfect combustion cocktail.
Very cool.
It's all about getting that fuel-air mixture just right.
Right. And fuel injection.
Yeah, fuel injection.
That's the more modern system, right? Like in cars and newer planes.
Exactly. Fuel injection is all about precision.
Okay.
It uses pumps and nozzles, sprays the fuel right into the cylinders,
Okay.
gives you that fine control over the fuel-air mix.
So it's a more controlled, efficient approach.
You got it.
But I remember reading about carburetors having issues with icing.
Ah, yes, carburetor icing.
What's that all about?
It's a problem, especially when you're flying in cold, humid conditions.
Right.
So the air flowing through the carburetor,
Yeah.
it's carrying moisture, and when that hits the cold metal...
Hey, like your windshield fogging up in the winter, but inside the engine.
Exactly.
Oh, no.
And that ice can build up, block airflow.
That doesn't sound good.
Not good at all. The engine can sputter, even stall.
So what do you do about it?
Pilots are always on the lookout for it,
Okay.
and they can use carburetor heat to melt it away.
So it's like a defrost for your engine.
Exactly. It diverts hot air from the exhaust to warm things up.
Pretty smart. So we've got the fuel and air mixed,
We do.
but how do you actually get that to ignite?
Ah, the magic of ignition. Magnetos and spark plugs.
Spark plugs, like in a car.
Similar idea, but instead of a battery, airplanes use these things called magnetos.
And why magnetos?
Safety. They're independent of the plane's electrical system.
Oh, that's a good idea.
So even if there's an electrical failure, the engines keep running.
That is a good idea.
Redundancy is key when you're flying.
Yeah, redundancy is good.
And speaking of redundancy, you've also got the dual ignition system.
Oh, right. What was that again?
Each cylinder has 2 spark plugs, each fired by a separate magneto.
Okay.
That way, even if one fails, the other one can take over.
Wow, they really don't mess around with safety.
Nope, they take it seriously up there.
So the engine is running, but all that burning must make a lot of heat.
A tremendous amount of heat.
Yeah, how do they keep things from, well, melting?
That, my friend, is the job of the cooling system.
Okay, what's that all about?
It's a team effort, really.
Okay.
Oil and air working together to dissipate that heat.
So oil, it does more than just lubricate.
Oh, yeah. Oil is a multitasker.
Right.
Reduces friction, carries away heat.
It's like a tiny radiator for all the moving parts.
That's a great way to think about it.
And the textbook mentioned wet sump and dry sump oil systems.
Ah, yes. Good catch.
What's the difference?
So wet sump is simpler.
Oh, okay.
Oil is stored in a sump at the bottom of the engine,
Okay.
often in smaller engines.
Got it.
Dry sump systems,
Right.
more common in bigger, more powerful engines.
Okay.
Oil is stored in a separate tank,
Okay.
circulated through the engine with pumps.
So it was like having a dedicated oil cooler for the engine.
Exactly. And pilots can monitor all this with gauges.
So they're always checking on things.
Always. Those gauges show oil pressure, temperature, like the engine's vital signs,
Okay. Makes sense.
any weird readings, and they know something's up.
And what about cooling with air?
Ah, yes. Air cooling.
The textbook mentioned baffles and cowl flaps.
Right. So air cooling uses the airflow over the engine
Okay.
to take away heat.
Okay.
Baffles are like little air directors,
Yeah.
making sure that flow is even across the cylinder.
Okay, to make sure everything's cooled evenly.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then you've got the cowl flaps,
Mm-hmm.
adjustable panels on the engine cowling.
Okay.
It's like vents that the pilot can open and close
I see.
to control the airflow.
So hot weather, more airflow.
Exactly. It's all about keeping the engine at the right temperature.
So much to manage.
It's a lot.
Okay, so we've cooled the engine, but what about the exhaust?
Ah, yes. The exhaust.
Where does all that go?
Well, the exhaust system vents it out, obviously.
Right.
But it's got another job, too.
Really?
Yeah, it keeps you warm.
Wait, what?
The heat from the engine warms up the cabin.
Are you serious? That's amazing.
Efficient, right?
Very efficient.
Those exhaust gases, they're full of heat.
Right. But aren't they dangerous too?
You're right. Carbon monoxide, big concern.
Yeah.
That's why you need a good exhaust system.
Right, to keep everything sealed up.
Exactly. Vent those gases out and keep them out of the cabin.
It's a delicate balance.
It is.
Using the heat, but keeping everyone safe.
Exactly.
We've talked about the engines, the fuel,
Yeah.
but what about the electrical system?
Oh, right. Can't forget about the electrical system.
All the lights, the instruments, that all needs power.
It's like the nervous system of the plane.
Right.
And at the heart of it is the alternator or generator.
The textbook mentioned both.
Yeah, they both make electricity.
Okay.
Alternators are more efficient, though.
So that's what you see in most planes today.
Pretty much, yeah. They make AC power, which gets converted to DC to run everything.
Okay, so same job, different process.
Exactly.
And how can pilots tell if the electrical system is healthy?
They've got gauges for that, too.
Of course they do.
The ammeter, it tells them how much the battery's charging. And the load meter shows how much electricity the system is using.
So they're always making sure there's enough power to go around.
Exactly. Balancing act.
We've covered so much. Engines, fuel, cooling, electrical.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. And we haven't even talked about how the plane actually gets off the ground.
The adventure continues.
I know, right? We've got a lot more to explore.
We do. We talk about all this stuff happening with the engines down here on the ground.
Right.
But it gets really wild when you think about being
Yeah.
tens of thousands of feet up.
Up in the air.
Yeah, it's a whole different world up there.
It's true. We're not exactly built for those altitudes.
Not at all. Thin air, freezing temperatures.
Just brutal.
Yeah, your body needs some serious help to handle that.
Which is where those pressurization systems come in, right?
Exactly. They're like creating a little bubble of breathable atmosphere.
Right. So even at 30,000 feet,
Yeah.
it feels like you're much lower.
Exactly. Maybe around 8,000 feet or so. Much more comfortable.
Like tricking your body into thinking you're still on the ground.
Exactly.
But what happens if something goes wrong with that pressurization?
That's the big question, isn't it?
That's got to be bad.
Decompression, they call it.
Right, I remember that from the textbook.
And it can happen in a couple of different ways.
Explosive and rapid, those are the two.
You got it. Explosive decompression.
It sounds terrifying.
It's as bad as it sounds. It's a sudden loss of pressure, like a balloon popping.
Oh, wow.
And then there's rapid decompression.
Okay.
Still not great, but a bit slower.
But either way, your body can't handle that, right?
Not really, no.
What happens?
Well, hypoxia is the big danger.
Right, that's when you don't get enough oxygen.
Exactly. You get confused, dizzy, might even pass out.
And in a rapid decompression, you might only have seconds to put your oxygen mask on.
You've got to be quick. Those oxygen masks, they're lifesavers.
It's so important.
Yeah, get that mask on, follow the crew's instructions, and you'll be okay.
And those masks have their own separate oxygen supply, right?
They do, good point. Not relying on that cabin air.
Which is long gone at that point.
Exactly. It's all about redundancy, just like with the engines. Keeps everyone breathing no matter what.
That's reassuring.
Yeah.
Well, what about on normal flights at high altitude?
Hmm.
Do they use oxygen even without any problems?
Yeah, good question. Even with a pressurized cabin, the air is still pretty thin up there.
Right, you're still at, what, 30,000 feet?
Exactly. So above 10,000 feet, most planes have oxygen systems.
For everyone.
Passengers and crew. Safety first.
It's like a just in case, even though the cabin's pressurized.
Exactly. Better safe than sorry when it comes to oxygen.
Makes sense. And are there different types of oxygen systems?
Yeah, you've got different types of masks and systems.
Okay.
Passengers usually have continuous flow.
Oh.
Oxygen just flows right into the mask.
Simple enough.
Yeah, the crew often have more complex ones with regulators.
What do those do?
They help conserve oxygen, important for the pilots who might need it longer.
Right, makes sense.
Automatically adjusts the flow based on altitude, how you're breathing. Pretty neat stuff.
So much tech goes into something we usually take for granted, breathing.
It's true. But hey, that's aviation for you.
Okay, so we've covered thin air. Now what about the other big challenge up there? Icing.
Ah, yes, icing.
That always sounded scary to me.
It's a real concern for pilots.
I bet. Like driving on ice, but you're in a plane.
That's a good way to put it. Ice can build up anywhere.
On the wings, the tail?
Wings, tail, propellers, even.
Really?
Yeah. And it messes with everything, disrupts airflow, reduces lift.
That's not good.
Not good at all. Plus, it can damage the engines.
So how do they stop it?
That's where anti-ice and de-ice systems come in.
Two different things, right?
Yeah, two lines of defense. Anti-ice, that's about preventing ice from forming.
Okay, got it.
De-ice, that's getting rid of ice that's already there.
Like an ice scraper, but for your plane.
Exactly.
So what do they use for anti-ice?
Heated leading edges are common.
What are those?
They're on the wings, tails, some propellers even. Basically, they use heat to keep those surfaces too warm for ice to form.
Heated seats, but for your wings.
Haha, something like that.
Clever. What else?
Weeping wings, kind of a funny name.
Weeping wings.
Yeah, but they're cool. They have tiny holes that spread antifreeze fluid over the wings.
So the ice can't stick.
Exactly. And then there are heated pitot tubes.
Heated what now?
Pitot tubes, those little probes on the front of the plane.
Oh, right. I've seen those.
They measure airspeed. Really important.
Okay.
And if they ice over, your speed readings are useless.
That makes sense.
So they have heaters to keep them clear.
Safety first.
Always. What about de-icing?
Yeah, what about when the ice is already there?
You've got things like inflatable boots.
Boots? Like on your feet?
Not quite. They're more like big rubber pads on the wings and tail.
Okay.
They inflate, break up the ice.
Like giving your plane a little massage?
Haha. Yeah, you could say that. You've also got fluid de-ice systems, spraying a special fluid that melts the ice away.
So you've got heat, antifreeze, inflatable things, special fluids.
Icing's a serious business.
We got a solution for everything.
They gotta stay ahead of the elements up there.
It's really incredible, all these systems working together to keep planes safe.
It's pretty amazing.
But I do wonder, how do pilots keep track of it all?
Well, that's where their training comes in.
Years of it, I'm sure.
It's about understanding all these systems, inside and out.
Right, and how they all work together.
Exactly, and knowing how to react no matter what happens.
So we've spent all this time learning about
It's a lot of information, yeah.
all the amazing stuff that keeps planes flying.
It's impressive, right?
Engines, fuel, pressurization, de-icing, the whole shebang.
It's a lot to take in.
It is.
Yeah.
And it makes you realize pilots,
Yeah.
they're not just flying the plane, they're managing all these complex systems at the same time.
It's true. It's a lot more than just holding onto a steering wheel.
Right. So what's going on in their heads up there when they're taxiing, taking off, landing.
Well, they have to really understand how all those systems work together
Right.
and how they'll react in different situations.
But give me an example. What about engine management?
Okay, so take off.
Okay.
They're not just pushing the throttles forward and hoping for the best, you know?
Right.
They're watching the engine instruments, looking for any changes in temperature, pressure,
Right.
adjusting the fuel mixture, even fine-tuning the propeller speed in some planes.
It's like they're conducting an orchestra, but instead of instruments,
Exactly.
it's all these systems.
Harmony and precision, that's the key, especially during those critical phases of flight.
And takeoff, I imagine that's pretty demanding on the engines
Oh yeah, they're pushing those engines to the limit.
to get all that power for takeoff.
Exactly, and they're making sure everything stays safe at the same time.
There's so much to think about.
It's a lot of multitasking.
And once they're in the air, does it get any easier?
Not really. They're adjusting for climb performance, fuel efficiency,
Yeah,
constantly
right.
checking those instruments because even small changes can have a big impact.
Right, because you're up so high.
The air is thinner, temperatures change.
Right.
So they're always adjusting.
Always fine-tuning. And landing, what about that?
Landing's a whole other challenge.
It looks so smooth from the passenger seat.
It takes practice. They're gradually reducing power, adjusting the propeller if they need to,
Yeah.
using those controls to get the right descent rate, approach angle.
So much precision.
Absolutely. And it's not over once they touch down.
Oh, right.
Still got to taxi back to the gate.
Right, of course. Is engine management different down on the ground?
It is. They might use reverse thrust to slow down.
Oh, right, those loud engines after landing.
That's it. And they're using the brakes to steer, too.
So even when they're back on the ground, they're still working hard.
Always on their toes, those pilots.
It really gives you a new appreciation for what they do.
It should.
It's a tough job.
Demanding, yeah.
Hmm.
But somebody's got to do it.
That's for sure. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have
Engines, fuel, pressurization, de-icing, the works.
the inner workings of an airplane.
It's amazing how it all comes together to get us from point A to point B.
It's a marvel of engineering, no doubt about it.
It really is. So next time you're on a plane,
Yeah.
take a moment to think about all those systems working their magic.
And those pilots up front, keeping it all under control.
Exactly. Well, that's it for this deep dive into aircraft systems. Thanks for flying with us.
Until next time.